The forests around Philadelphia hummed with construction sounds that most residents never noticed. Beneath the earth, hidden behind razor wire and concrete barriers, American engineers were installing the first of 18 Nike air defense missile sites across Pennsylvania. This is the true story of these installations, based on declassified military records, historical research, and documentation from the Cold War era. Children played in backyards. Families drove highways past guard posts they knew were military installations but understood little about. And above ground, the full capabilities of these sites remain largely unknown to the general public. What they were building was real, and it was enormous. Project Nike was the most expensive air defense system ever constructed by the United States military. Between 1953 and 1974, the Pentagon built over 250 Nike missile installations across the continental landscape. Pennsylvania, with its dense concentration of steel mills, coal mines, and manufacturing plants, received one of the heaviest concentrations of these weapons anywhere in America. 18 sites spread across 5 counties. Each one was a fortress built downward, sunk into the earth like a bunker designed not just for defense, but for institutional secrecy. To understand why the government chose to build these weapons in Pennsylvania, you have to understand what Pennsylvania meant to America in 1953. The state was the industrial heart of the nation. Pittsburgh produced the steel that built American cities. Philadelphia manufactured locomotives, ships, and precision machinery. The coal regions fed power plants across the Northeast. If the Soviet Union ever launched a serious air attack against America, Pennsylvania wasn't just a military target, it was the economic target. Destroy Pennsylvania's industry and you cripple American manufacturing capacity. You cripple the ability to wage war. You potentially cripple the entire American economy. The Pentagon understood this. Military planners calculated that defending these regions wasn't just a matter of national security, it was a matter of national survival. So they made a decision: ring Pennsylvania's industrial heart with a necklace of nuclear-armed missiles. The sites would be positioned in rural areas far enough from cities to limit civilian casualties if something went wrong, but close enough to intercept Soviet bombers before they reached their targets. The Nike system itself was revolutionary, representing the cutting edge of 1950s military technology. Named after the Greek goddess of victory, it was an integrated air defense network featuring radar arrays that could track aircraft across impossible distances, computers that could calculate intercept trajectories, and missiles capable of reaching altitudes above 30,000 feet. The system required constant coordination between multiple sites. A single radar installation might detect incoming aircraft, but the actual targeting and launch decisions were made through a networked command structure that connected sites across hundreds of miles. The weapons themselves came in 2 variants. The Nike Ajax was equipped with conventional high-explosive warheads capable of destroying Soviet bombers through sheer destructive force. The Nike Hercules, which became the primary variant by the 1960s, was designed to carry nuclear warheads with yields between 2 and 40 kilotons. Each warhead was roughly equivalent to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 18 Nike sites were positioned across Pennsylvania's industrial regions, from Erie in the northwest to sites near the Maryland border in the southwest. Some of these sites were equipped with nuclear-capable Nike Hercules missiles, while others carried conventional weapons or maintained mixed arsenals. The actual construction of these sites happened quietly, methodically, and in phases throughout the 1950s. The sites were located on government-owned land or through quietly negotiated purchases that attracted no particular public attention. In rural areas, officials sometimes told property owners they were hosting a telecommunications relay station or some other innocuous facility. The actual buildings constructed above ground were deliberately forgettable. Small concrete structures, blocky and utilitarian, that looked like they could have belonged to an electric company or water authority. Guard posts, equipment sheds, a small operations building. To anyone driving past, these installations were visible as military facilities, but their actual capabilities and armaments were not widely publicized or understood. Below ground was where the real construction happened. Excavation crews removed thousands of tons of earth and bedrock. Workers built large underground storage magazines, reinforced chambers designed to safely house missiles and maintain them until they were needed. These weren't conventional bunkers. They were engineered to withstand direct conventional bomb hits and survive the electromagnetic pulse of nearby nuclear detonation. The Nike missiles themselves were stored in launch canisters, ready for vertical launch. Radar arrays swept continuously from above-ground domes. Power generators hummed in adjacent chambers. Communication cables connected these 18 Pennsylvania sites into a continental defense network that stretched from coast to coast. The budget was staggering. Estimates suggest over $800 million spent just on Pennsylvania's Nike infrastructure in the 1950s. Adjusted for inflation, that's more than $4 billion in today's money. For comparison, the entire Pennsylvania highway system cost less. The government was making a choice: guns, not butter; defense, not prosperity; nuclear weapons buried in American soil. The men and women who staffed these facilities were primarily military personnel. Young officers, career sergeants, technicians trained specifically for this mission. Most of them signed security clearances, binding them to secrecy for life. They worked in rotating shifts, living in a state of constant alertness. Soldiers would spend hours in underground command centers, monitoring radar screens, maintaining launch systems, conducting drills for scenarios they hoped would never occur. The job was psychologically grinding in ways that civilian experience couldn't quite capture. They were trained for a war that everyone hoped would never come. They maintained weapons that were explicitly designed never to be used. They guarded against a threat that existed primarily in theoretical military strategy: Soviet bombers that by the time Nike was fully operational were already becoming obsolete. Daily life at a Nike site followed rigid protocols. Shift changes occurred at precise times. Maintenance schedules were maintained with military precision. Launch readiness checks happened continuously. Personnel who worked underground developed a strange relationship with the facility itself. Some described the experience as meditative, almost peaceful. The hum of generators, the controlled environment, the clear hierarchy and purpose. Others found the confinement and isolation profoundly disturbing. Underground for 6, 8, sometimes 12 hours at a stretch, with no natural light, no connection to the world above except through radio communications. The psychological isolation was significant, and the military understood this. Rotation schedules were designed to minimize the time any single person spent in these underground environments. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, those stationed at Pennsylvania Nike sites genuinely expected to launch. The alert status was raised. The missiles were put on standby. Warheads were made ready. Somewhere below the hills of western Pennsylvania, military personnel sat at control stations with fingers near authorization buttons, wondering if today was the day civilization ended. The crisis passed. The missiles were never fired. But the psychological weight of that moment, knowing you were seconds away from potentially triggering human extinction, left marks on the people who experienced it. But there was a fundamental problem with the entire Nike system that the Pentagon never fully solved. Nuclear-armed missiles, positioned this close to population centers, created a strategic contradiction that was impossible to resolve mathematically. If the Soviet Union actually attacked Pennsylvania, launching Nike Hercules missiles with nuclear warheads might kill more Americans through radiation fallout than the Soviet bombs would have. Military planners understood this paradox. They couldn't solve it. So instead, they maintained the fiction that these weapons would somehow defend America, even though the basic mathematics of nuclear war suggested they would merely distribute death more evenly. This contradiction became increasingly apparent as military strategy evolved. In the 1960s, the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles changed everything. Soviet bombers became less of a threat. The real danger now came from nuclear missiles launched from submarines and distant launch sites. Air defense suddenly seemed less critical. The entire strategic rationale for the Nike system began to erode. By the early 1970s, the Pentagon had made the decision. The Nike system was becoming obsolete. The sites were beginning to be decommissioned. Missiles were removed. Personnel were reassigned. The installations were placed on inactive status. Slowly, Pennsylvania's nuclear guardians were stood down. The weapons that had sat in underground bunkers for nearly 20 years, ready to launch, were finally taken offline. What happened next was stranger than any official plan. Some Nike sites were handed over to civilian government agencies or local municipalities. A few were developed into parks or recreational areas. Some were simply abandoned, left to decay. Others were sealed with the understanding that the seals would be permanent. The government moved on. The military reassigned its personnel. The contractors who had built these installations packed up their equipment and found new projects. But the physical installations themselves remained, and they became something unexpected, a hidden part of American history that most Americans never even knew existed. In the decades after decommissioning, urban explorers and hikers began discovering these abandoned sites. Some were flooded with groundwater, creating eerie underground pools of still, dark water. Others were sealed so completely that determining whether anything remained inside was nearly impossible. But many were accessible, and what explorers found was haunting. Equipment left behind, control panels still mounted on concrete walls, the physical remnants of a defense system that had stood ready but never been used. Some sites became local curiosities. Near Philadelphia, one Nike site was partially excavated and turned into a small museum, allowing visitors to walk through the actual underground chambers where weapons had been stored. The experience is deeply unsettling. You descend into darkness, the air is cold and damp, the concrete walls still bear the marks of Cold War-era construction, and you realize that you are standing in the exact spot where nuclear weapons were pointed at the sky, ready to defend your city or incinerate it. Other sites remain completely unknown to the general public. In rural areas, abandoned installations became overgrown with vegetation. Concrete deteriorated. Rusted doors hung open. Local property owners sometimes didn't even know what was buried beneath their land. The government had built these structures so effectively that they could vanish just as completely once they were no longer needed. The real mystery of Pennsylvania's Nike sites isn't what happened during their operational years. Military records and declassified documents provide a clear picture. The mystery is much stranger than any conspiracy. Why did America build these weapons? Why did they position them so close to population centers? And perhaps most importantly, why did we forget about them so completely? The answer is tied to the fundamental irrationality of nuclear war strategy. During the Cold War, America pursued a policy of deterrence through overwhelming force. If the Soviet Union attacked, America would respond with such destructive power that attack would be unthinkable. Nike was part of that calculation. Nuclear-armed missiles in the suburbs, weapons that could never actually be used without destroying the very things they were meant to protect. A system designed on the assumption that it would never work, because if it ever had to work, it would mean civilization was already ending. The people who staffed these sites understood this contradiction. Interviews with former Nike personnel, declassified military records, and historical accounts paint a picture of men and women who knew they were maintaining weapons of last resort. Some described the experience as psychologically numbing. Others talked about the persistent anxiety that came from knowing they were seconds away from potentially triggering a nuclear exchange. A few requested transfers, unable to handle the psychological weight, but most simply endured, maintaining their vigil, keeping their secrets, trying not to think too deeply about what they were actually guarding. What surrounded these sites wasn't really a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It was more fundamental than that. The government built these installations, and the detailed operational information remained classified. Detailed specifications about weapons capabilities and site functions were restricted from public knowledge. Employees were bound by security clearances they maintained even after decommissioning. The government wasn't hiding an ongoing secret. it was restricting information about what it had built during the Cold War. The full capabilities of these sites were not widely understood by the public, creating a situation where communities knew military installations existed nearby, but understood little about their actual purpose or weaponry. Today, Pennsylvania's Nike sites exist in a strange liminal space. Some have been completely demolished, leaving only empty fields and faint concrete depressions in the earth where bunkers once stood. Some have been repurposed as storage facilities, administrative offices, or private property, their original purpose obscured by layers of civilian use. A few have been preserved as historical monuments, allowing visitors to walk through the underground chambers and confront the physical reality of Cold War nuclear strategy. One such site near Philadelphia has been partially opened as a museum, where visitors can descend into the darkness and stand in the exact spot where nuclear weapons once waited for launch orders. The experience is profoundly disorienting. The concrete walls, the equipment still mounted on brackets, the sense of preserved time. But most have simply faded from public memory. They exist in the landscape, but almost nobody knows they're there. Local property owners sometimes don't realize what's buried beneath their land. Hiking trails pass near abandoned installations without any markers or signs. The forest has reclaimed some of the above-ground structures, with vegetation growing through cracks in concrete, paint peeling from corroded steel. Urban explorers have documented some sites, creating photographs and videos of the abandoned facilities. But these images circulate primarily in niche communities. The general public remains largely unaware that they live in a landscape literally built on top of Cold War nuclear weapons. Some sites have been sealed deliberately, with steel doors locked and concrete barriers installed to prevent access. These seals carry implicit messages. Nothing to see here, move along. In a few cases, the sites have been designated as environmental remediation areas, which provides a legal justification for keeping the public out. Whether there is actual environmental remediation happening, or whether this is simply a bureaucratic mechanism for maintaining control of the property remains unclear. The government maintains its institutional silence about these installations, neither fully acknowledging them nor explaining what has happened to them. What remains is a historical question that's more important than any conspiracy. What does it say about a nation that it built nuclear weapons in the suburbs to defend its industrial heartland, knowing full well that using those weapons would destroy the very things they were meant to protect? What does it say about Cold War strategy that it relied on weapons that could never actually be used without triggering mutual annihilation? The answer is that Pennsylvania's Nike sites are a physical monument to the fundamental insanity of nuclear deterrence. They represent an era when military planners decided that the only way to prevent nuclear war was to position nuclear weapons everywhere, in the suburbs, near cities, beneath the ground where families lived. They represent weapons that were maintained in constant readiness for nearly 20 years, ready to defend America by potentially destroying it. The sites are abandoned now. The missiles are gone. The personnel who staff them have mostly moved on to other lives. Carrying memories they're bound by security clearance to keep largely private. But the concrete bunkers remain, slowly deteriorating, slowly being reclaimed by nature. They stand as silent testimony to an era when America's strategy for survival was based on the principle of mutual assured destruction. A principle so terrifying that the only way to live with it was to stop thinking about it. Pennsylvania's Nike missile sites defended America's industry not by preventing war, but by existing. Their presence was the entire point. They didn't need to be used, they only needed to exist, to remind the Soviet Union that America had positioned nuclear weapons everywhere, that any attack would be met with overwhelming retaliation. They were weapons that worked through intimidation rather than function. That strategy prevailed. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. The threat that justified these installations became historical. And now we're left with the ruins, physical and psychological, of an era when America chose to position apocalyptic weapons in its own suburbs in the name of security.